The narrator reflects on his past, realizing he was fundamentally different from everyone around him. This profound isolation often led him to deny his own reality. He stands amidst the aftermath of a slaughter, looking upon the bloody consequences of his path. This carnage is the harsh truth he has come to accept. He dedicated his life to studying the Demon King's standards, a foundational theory established by the first emperor of the demon realm. He followed these ancient precepts more strictly than anyone else. He usurps the throne, understanding that a demon king thrives on the negative emotions of others. He treats the anger and sadness of his victims as a magnificent feast. Embracing his role, he fights with a ferocity that feeds on the despair of his enemies. In the past, he maintained a composed and confident facade among his peers. He navigated their society with a smile, hiding his true ambitions. He utilized forbidden tomes and dark magic to further his ascent to power. He played the part of the villain perfectly, commanding monsters to kidnap royalty and terrorize the kingdom. He did not just wait for challengers. He actively cultivated the heroes who came to stop him. He kept them contained, manipulating their growth for his own ends. To him, the party of heroes was not a threat, but a meal waiting to be served. He viewed them as mere sustenance on his dinner plate. He devoured their efforts and hopes, consuming them as easily as one would eat a meal. With the heroes corrupted and defeated, his total conquest of the world became inevitable. He achieved his ultimate goal, sitting upon the throne as the supreme ruler of darkness. However, the story returns to the present, where he sits slumped and battered on that same throne. Despite his grievous injuries and bloodied state, he faces his end with a defiant, twisted grin. The hero confronts his enemy with a mocking grin. Tired of hearing the same old speeches from villains, he swings his massive blade with manic energy, cutting off the Demon King's words mid-sentence. His eyes burn with an intense, unhinged focus as he presses the attack. Standing before the throne, he lectures the villain on the cliché habit of kidnapping princesses and leaving obvious trails for heroes to follow. The two clash violently, but the hero's overwhelming strength forces the Demon King to struggle for breath. The villain's expression shifts as he realizes the sheer power of the intruder. A magical grimoire floats nearby, witnessing the fall of its master. The hero cheerfully twists the narrative, claiming the Demon King's schemes were actually just helpful training exercises. He recalls how they marched toward the ominous Dark Tower to reach this final stage. They fought their way through endless waves of shadow monsters and goblins to get here. With a brutal kick, the hero sends the Demon King flying across the room. The villain is left reeling, unable to comprehend the violence being inflicted upon him. The Demon King collapses to the floor in defeat while the hero stands triumphantly over him. A look of pure, twisted joy spreads across the hero's face as the battle concludes. The hero's companions cheer loudly, mockingly thanking the defeated Demon King for being such excellent fodder for their growth. The heroes cheer and laugh in triumph, celebrating the fall of their greatest enemy. Lying broken and bleeding on the ground, the defeated Demon King questions his reality. The hero looks down at his fallen foe with a twisted, mocking smile. Without hesitation, the warrior raises his greatsword to deliver the final execution. Realizing the absurdity of his end, the Demon King grits his teeth in sheer fury. He digs his claws into the bloody floor, refusing to accept this fate. Power surges through his inverted vision as he prepares a desperate final defiance. With all his remaining strength, he screams his title, asserting his identity one last time. The roar tears through his body as he unleashes his dying will. But his vision begins to fail and the image of his enemies blurs into nothingness. Consciousness fades, leaving only a view of the ceiling stained with blood. The hero stands over the corpse in the silent hall, looking down at his work. Suddenly, the hero's blade begins to crackle with a strange, dark energy. The purple lightning intensifies, reacting violently over the fallen body. A spectral energy consumes the scene, dissolving the world into blinding light and shadows. A lone figure stands before the court, facing a small, theatrical demon who seems to be making a dramatic announcement. Standing among the ranks of uniformed soldiers, the man wonders why he has returned to this place. The small announcer points an accusing finger at him, laughing maniacally while the crowd watches. He faces a massive holographic display listing the Demon King's standard, a set of rules dictating how they must act as villains. The man listens to the mandates with a cold, unimpressed expression, showing no interest in the duties listed before him. The surrounding recruits look on in confusion, unsure why the proceedings have taken such a strange turn. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts and he stands isolated in the center of the room as the crowd pulls back. The spectators gasp in shock. their faces twisting with disbelief at what is unfolding. Even the elders lose their composure, screaming out in sudden outrage at the situation. The intensity of the reaction seems to shake the entire dark castle, sending tremors through the night. The man's patience finally snaps and he grits his teeth in visible frustration. He slams his fist down hard, his anger boiling over as he reacts to the absurdity of the moment. The Archduke of the Demon Realm, Arcane Blarimph, roars in fury, his eyes burning with magical fire as he scolds the subordinate. From his high balcony, the Archduke looks down upon the lone soldier, his voice echoing through the vast hall. The command is given for him to apologize to the entire realm, sealing his fate with an immediate deployment to a notorious location. The crowd whispers in fear about a notorious dimension known for claiming the lives of countless demon kings. Unease spreads among the masked spectators as they gossip about the dangerous assignment. A high-ranking official stands solemnly, presiding over the deployment order. The young demon grits his teeth, his expression hardening with determination. He looks upward, accepting the fate that is about to be handed down to him. The command is issued for Beredeas to be deployed immediately to the location known as Arin. A crimson magic circle activates beneath him, beginning the teleportation process. A portal opens high in the sky, dropping him into a free fall through the clouds. As he plummets headfirst toward the ground, he remains calm and focused. The vast landscape of the dimension of Arin stretches out far beneath his falling form. The object he was carrying shatters into pieces during the intense descent. He crashes into a snowy mountain peak with explosive force, sending debris flying. As the snow settles, a figure with large black wings remains crouched in the crater. He rises from the impact site, revealing his horns and full demonic power. With a sharp and intense gaze, he prepares to face the challenges of this new world. The young man carefully shaves, preparing himself for the most important day of his life. He fastens the buttons of his shirt with precision, ensuring every detail is perfect. Satisfied with his appearance, the top graduate of the Demon Academy stands ready to receive his honors. He overlooks the grand hall where the graduation ceremony is currently underway. From his high vantage point, he looks down smugly at the students who place second and third behind him. He flashes a confident smile, enjoying his moment of superiority over his peers. His confidence swells into a dark, ambitious grin as he contemplates his future. On the stage below, a stern commander stands before the assembly of graduates. The speech declares that they possess the power to conquer any dimension. Inspired by the promise of power, the top graduate clenches his fist in determination. He watches intently, expecting a prestigious assignment to match his rank. However, his expression suddenly shifts from confidence to utter confusion. Instead of a glorious post, he finds himself transported to the freezing, desolate mountains of the northern continent. He stares in disbelief as the commander from the ceremony stands before him in the snow. The graduate remains frozen in shock, unable to comprehend this unexpected turn of events. A man in a dark uniform reaches out, his expression grim amidst the falling snow. He questions the elf standing opposite him, gesturing towards the luggage abandoned in the frozen wasteland. The elf's composure suddenly shatters as he grabs his head in distress. He screams furiously, insisting that the state of his hair is not the problem right now. The human watches silently, looking unimpressed as his companion crouches in a dramatic breakdown. Suddenly shifting gears, the elf forces a smile and tries to reassure them both that they can succeed together. But the optimism is short-lived, and his face twists into a pained grimace as the stress returns. He explains that the area is nearly impossible for humans to access due to the powerful monsters roaming there. Ignoring the danger, the man crouches to pick up a red object from the snow, startling the elf. The elf yells in panic, hastily clarifying that he never swore any oath to follow such reckless actions. The man stares at the object, his face contorted with deep disgust. He crushes the item in his fist, letting the remains drip while insulting the Demon King's standards. The elf watches in stunned silence, sweat running down his face. The air around them begins to vibrate with an ominous energy. The crushed artifact erupts with red light, releasing a massive surge of power. A figure lands heavily on the ground, signaling their arrival with a burst of energy. The man begins to speak about the heroes of this world. He recalls the parties of warriors, mages, and archers who banded together to fight. Their battles took place within the territory of the demonic dragon tribe, amidst glowing magic circles. Time and again, these heroes succeeded in bringing the massive tower crashing down. However, the man explains that after countless destructions, humanity realized the tower operates on a specific mechanism. His companion, an elf wearing glasses, looks disturbed by this revelation. No matter how many times it fell, the tower would always stand tall again. The two men walk through the snow and step into the dark entrance of the structure. They stand alone in the vast checkered hall of the first floor of Berja's tower. As the human leads the way, the elf follows behind, deep in thought and seemingly skeptical. They walk down a long red carpet toward a throne room illuminated by a chandelier. The elf focuses intently, understanding that their goal is to reverse the tower's cycle. To do this, they need a specific target, a captured royal, preferably a prince or princess close to the throne. The two conspirators stand in the silent hall, preparing to put their plan into motion. A loyal subordinate adjusts his glasses, looking serious and concerned about the situation. He shouts that he wants to help, but his master turns his back and orders him to stay behind and guard the area. The subordinate reacts with intensity, watching his leader prepare to depart. The master crouches on the window ledge, leaving his ally behind as he prepares to jump out. The scene shifts to a quiet balcony at night, where the wind blows the curtains through an open door. Inside the room, a blonde princess sits on her bed and watches a winged figure hovering outside the window. The narrator introduces her as a princess with a very weak presence. The intruder, revealed to be a horned demon king, looks surprised as he enters the room. He stands confidently before the girl, asserting his identity as a powerful demon king. The princess stares up at him with wide eyes, seemingly in shock at his arrival. However, she calmly explains that she always thought something like this would happen since she was born a princess. The demon king looks at her with skepticism, unable to believe her lack of fear. To his confusion, the princess suddenly throws her arms open and eagerly asks him to take her away. She kneels on the bed with a bright, desperate smile, offering herself to the demon. Suspicious of her strange enthusiasm, the demon king leans in and demands to know what she is plotting. The demon king gazes intently at the woman standing before him. She looks up at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. He pauses for a moment, silently observing her reaction. Making his decision, he invites her to leave with him. A dragon soars over the snowy peaks of the Urgest Mountains, approaching the isolated Berja's tower. Inside the castle, he carries the girl in his arms across the hall, approaching his waiting subordinate. He orders the perplexed servant to house the girl in the corner of the 4th floor rather than the prison. The servant listens to the command with a skeptical expression but does not openly object. The girl is left standing alone in the center of the vast empty room on the 4th floor. She collapses onto the cold ground, realizing how hard and uncomfortable the floor is. Her thoughts drift to the comforts she is missing, noting the lack of soft pillows and furniture. She imagines the beautiful scenery she is used to, lamenting the absence of pretty gardens here. Although this place is nothing like her kingdom, she finds herself blushing with a secret thought. Elsewhere in the castle, the man composes himself with a serious expression. His subordinate stands behind him, announcing that a welcome party has been prepared for the new demon king. Powerful beings are fundamentally too proud to join hands with anyone else, yet Arain proved to be an unprecedented exception to this rule. The dark-haired man observes the situation with a cold, unreadable expression. His journey has led him to a towering, ancient structure overgrown with vines and bathed in sunlight. Inside the hall, Draxin, the demon king of beasts, sits upon his throne while casually tearing into a large piece of meat. The beast's glowing red eye shifts, locking onto the intruder with a predatory glare. Realizing the hostility in the air, Arain sighs and admits to himself that coming here was a mistake. The massive wolf looms over his human guest, emphasizing the sheer difference in their physical power. Arain considers that previous attempts to improve the Beast King's foul mood have clearly failed. Draxin bares his sharp teeth, his expression twisting into a menacing, aggressive grin. With a violent motion, the Beast King slams his meal onto the floor, sending debris flying. Arain remains perfectly still and unfazed as the giant wolf growls directly in his face. A shadow falls over Arain's eyes as he decides to stop being passive. He stomps his foot against the stone floor with devastating force. The ground shatters beneath him as a terrifying red aura explodes outward, blowing his companion back. The sudden release of overwhelming power leaves the room in stunned silence. The dark-haired man challenges the idea that he would follow any rules with a fierce intensity in his eyes. A massive wolf creature roars in response, its red eyes glowing with raw power. Walking away from the cracked earth, the man casually reveals he has already kidnapped a princess. The wolf beast is left dumbfounded and sweating as the man and his elf subordinate depart without a backward glance. High in the snowy mountains, a dark, imposing fortress stands against the cold sky. Inside the throne room, the man sits regally while his advisor stands at attention beside him. The man leans back looking bored, while his advisor leans in closer. The quiet of the castle is interrupted by the rhythmic sound of footsteps echoing near the large windows. The man runs a hand through his hair, appearing weary or perhaps frustrated with the situation. His expression suddenly shifts, his eyes narrowing with sharp focus. He stands up abruptly from his throne, his posture tense and alert. A blue holographic screen manifests in the air before him, displaying data and a silhouette. He stares at the screen in shock, a drop of sweat trickling down his face as he processes the information. An icon of an envelope appears on the display, indicating an incoming message. The message plays, revealing the white wolf from before who offers congratulations despite their unfortunate first meeting. The man analyzes a holographic card, questioning if the tactics he witnessed were merely a deception to hide the truth. A sudden realization strikes him, and he breaks into a cold sweat, sensing that something is terribly wrong. His companion rushes frantically down the hallway, shouting a warning about what awaits them on the 4th floor. The scenery shifts instantly from the dark hallway to a bright garden filled with white flowers and blue butterflies. The man stands completely frozen, bewildered by the sudden and drastic change in his surroundings. A system notification announces his arrival at the 4th floor of the tower, which appears as a lush natural landscape within a digital grid. A young woman in a white dress, surrounded by elemental spirits, looks up and casually acknowledges his arrival. Despite the peaceful atmosphere, the man remains tense and stares at her with suspicion. He confronts the woman, who sits relaxed on a rock holding a large blue slime in her lap. His shock deepens as he tries to comprehend the situation and the person sitting before him. The woman smiles warmly, appearing completely innocent with a small cloud spirit resting on her head. The man recalls the background of his mission, which involves a kidnapping from a grand cathedral. He remembers the terrifying image of the demon king who was responsible for the abduction. Yet the woman in the garden simply smiles playfully and begins to speak to him. The man listens with a conflicted expression, struggling to connect the terrifying mission objective with the cheerful woman in front of him. The young woman holds up a glowing ring, presenting it with a gentle smile. She speaks to the man before her, explaining the significance of the magical artifact she carries. Her words strike him with sudden force, leaving him completely stunned. The realization hits him deep, freezing him in place as he processes what he just heard. A sudden system warning flashes into existence behind him, signaling an urgent alert. He faces the digital interface, his expression hardening into serious focus as he reads the message. The woman remains there, watching him with an innocent and questioning gaze. Far away from that peaceful garden, the majestic white castle of the kingdom of Hilderan stands tall. Inside the grand hall, the king sits upon his throne, presiding over a solemn gathering of his subjects. The atmosphere is heavy with tension, causing the attending nobles to sweat with visible nervousness. Unable to contain his temper, the king erupts into a furious shout that echoes through the hall. He demands immediate answers regarding the movements of the infamous demon king of lust. The mere mention of that title invokes the image of a dark fortress and a cold, calculating enemy. A collective gasp of shock and fear ripples through the gathered officials. Overcome with stress and anger, the king grips the armrest of his throne until his hand trembles. The human king bears a stern expression, the weight of his crown matching the gravity of the situation. He sits upon his throne in a tense royal court, listening to a report delivered by his knights. His eyes widen in shock as he exclaims about the treacherous mountains where the enemy resides. Far away in those frozen peaks, a solitary dark tower stands amidst the snow. Meanwhile, the demon king sits relaxed in his hall as his aide warns him of the approaching army. Instead of fear, a confident smirk appears on the demon king's face. He dismisses the concern with a smile, assuring his subordinate that the situation is under control. Back in the human kingdom, the king and his advisors study a map, troubled by the vast distance and nations in between. The demon king continues to smile, seemingly amused by the strategic dilemma his enemies face. Overwhelmed by the circumstances, the human king slumps over the map table, admitting he has no choice but to proceed. The imposing tower waits silently in the cold, a beacon for the coming conflict. In the city, adventurers gather around a quest board, baffled that a demon king would choose a land filled with hellish monsters. While some refuse to throw their lives away for heroism, a mercenary begins to speak of the king's offer. The demon king finishes the thought from afar, knowing that money is the only motivation that matters. His aide looks on in stunned silence, surprised by his master's cynical wisdom. The demon king sits in silence, his gaze intense as he contemplates the past. He remembers the outrage of human kings who questioned the destruction caused by the so-called heroes. Those rulers were left holding their heads in despair, overwhelmed by the chaos the heroes brought. To counter this threat, the Demon King reviews a magical interface displaying unit costs and dimensional upgrades. Seated on his throne, he calmly manipulates the holographic screens to manage his dungeon's resources. He recalls the terrifying image of the hero party, understanding the fear they instill in their enemies. He announces a shocking plan to his subordinate. He intends to sell his own demonic energy for human money. The subordinate screams in absolute horror and disbelief at his master's absurd proposal. Panic overtakes the servant as he struggles to comprehend why the Demon King would go to such extremes. The Demon King explains that his current power is simply not enough to stop the invading heroes. The scene shifts to the human realm, specifically the fortress city of Holton Work near the Urkis Mountains. A mysterious figure in a black cloak approaches the guards stationed at the city gates. The guards halt the stranger, demanding identification, and the figure calmly claims to be a simple mercenary. Instead of answering further questions, the stranger flips a gold coin to the guard, instantly buying his silence. As the disguised Demon King walks into the city, the guards behind him immediately start arguing over how to split the bribe. A lone figure in a black cloak walks through the busy town square, unnoticed by the bustling crowd. Inside a tavern, a gang member asks his relaxed leader if they should be leaving the area soon. The leader laughs off the concern, preferring to lie back on the table and enjoy the spoils of their battles. Another bandit joins the conversation, loudly claiming that the rumors about the Demon King are nothing but fake news. The men mock the legends, finding the idea of the Demon King completely ridiculous. Standing up with a beer, the bandit shouts that the story of a precious heir is just a trick to fool everyone. He laughs hysterically, fully convinced that he has seen through the deception. Suddenly, a dark, terrifying presence appears right behind him, coldly commenting on their conversation. The sheer shock of the stranger's arrival sends the bandits tumbling backward in fear. The intruder clenches his gloved hand and decides to leave only one of them alive. Realizing they are under attack, the gang members draw their weapons and charge at the infiltrator. The battle is instant and brutal, as the stranger smashes through the attackers with overwhelming force. He moves with blinding speed, striking down multiple enemies in a streak of violence. A massive brute attempts to stop the rampage by swinging a giant weapon down on the intruder. The stranger catches the heavy blow with a single hand, smiling with glowing red eyes as he easily blocks the attack. A look of sheer terror twists the man's face as he realizes the danger he is in. Armed guards rush forward in a panic, readying their crossbows to defend themselves. Chaos erupts in the room as the dark-haired fighter sends bodies and furniture flying with overwhelming force. The attacker smiles with a predatory glint in his eye, enjoying the violence. Outside the building, two companions walk away casually while the sounds of a brutal beating echo behind them. The woman seems bored by the familiar routine of violence, while her partner looks uneasy about the commotion. Silence returns to the room, where the floor is now littered with the unconscious bodies of the defeated men. The victor stands ominously over the last conscious enemy, radiating a terrifying dark energy. The scene shifts to a grand quiet mansion sitting peacefully behind a large fountain and iron gates. Two figures walk steadily across the paved courtyard of the estate, heading toward the main building. They pass by cages filled with ragged prisoners, and the guide offers a nervous smile to his guest. A heavy bag of gold is tossed through the air, shocking the guide with the sudden payment. The man's expression instantly changes to greedy delight as he sees the wealth he has just received. The guest watches him coldly, reflecting on how humans are driven by money just as demons are driven by power. Satisfied with the bribe, the guide gestures politely and invites the dark-haired man to follow him inside. Seated on his throne, the dark-haired ruler announces his intention to purchase slaves for a specific purpose. He determines that acquiring an elf would be the best course of action for his plans. At the slave market, a merchant presents a captured elf locked inside a heavy iron cage. The ruler's mind briefly flashes back to the image of a human hero kneeling before a king. He recalls the hero's shining armor and the air of nobility that surrounded him. The memory focuses on the hero's determined and righteous expression. Returning to the present, the ruler decides to use the captive elf as a spy against his enemies. He reasons that the elf is known for an innocent nature, which will make for the perfect disguise. The ruler confronts the merchant, demanding to purchase the noble elf who has been reduced to a miserable state. Terrified by a sudden dark energy, the merchant questions if the buyer is a demon, but eagerly accepts the gold. The ruler dismisses the fear, ignoring the merchant's warning that the elf is dangerous and might go berserk. The merchant clicks his tongue in displeasure but steps aside to let the transaction finish. The iron door of the cage creaks open, allowing the ruler to step inside. With a surge of purple magic, he unlocks the heavy muzzle binding the elf's face. The restraint falls away and the elf gasps for air, glaring up with wild, defiant eyes. The cloaked figure stands before the iron bars, offering a rare opportunity to the prisoner within. Inside the damp cell, the elf glares upward, his eyes burning with resentment and defiance. The visitor breaks the silence, speaking of the 50 years that have passed. He acknowledges that such a span of time is significant, even for the long-lived elven race. The prisoner lashes out, condemning the demon before him for seeking to destroy the sacred world tree and the world it sustains. The accusation strikes a nerve, leaving the visitor momentarily stunned by the elf's righteous fury. However, instead of anger, a faint, knowing smile touches the demon's lips. He summons a magical tome, declaring his intention to finally fulfill a promise he made. The elf freezes in shock as magical energy surrounds him, his thoughts still fixated on the sanctity of the world tree. Confusion quickly transforms into a twisted, manic grin on the prisoner's face. Identifying himself as Granada of the Maple tribe, the elf rises to his feet to confront his captor. The Demon King watches the elf's reaction with a calm and satisfied expression. Suddenly, the elf's demeanor shifts into aggressive desperation as he questions the demon's presence. He lunges forward and violently shakes the Demon King, shouting that the ruler's power is weak this far from his tower. Granada bursts into uncontrollable, unhinged laughter, mocking the situation and the time that lies ahead. 3 figures stand in the vast, silent throne room, the distance between them heavy with tension. The ruler watches from his seat with a smug expression, clearly amused by the elf's distress. Unable to contain his frustration, the elf screams out in disbelief. He yells loudly, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation he is facing. His mind flashes back to the terrifying, disaster-level monsters he encountered in the snowy mountains. Remembering the overwhelming power of those beasts, he realizes he has no choice but to submit to the man who controls them. Defeated, the elf kneels on the carpet and swears his absolute loyalty for the next 100 years. He comforts himself with the thought that such a significant pledge will surely earn him a prestigious and important role. The ruler smiles back at him warmly, seemingly pleased with this new arrangement. However, the elf is suddenly struck blank with shock as the reality of his actual assignment sets in. Instead of a grand position, he finds himself wearing an apron and chopping green onions, lamenting that he was supposed to be part of a great plan. He works in the kitchen alongside an energetic girl, confusedly asking about the recipe while elemental spirits float around them. Later, the group gathers in the grand hall to sit together at a long dining table. The elf pauses, looking surprised as the conversation turns toward the kingdom's affairs. The ruler formally introduces the blonde woman sitting with them as Erhin Hilderin. The green-haired elf shouts in shock and disbelief while his companion silently bows his head in resignation. Arryn stands over them with a piece of meat, casually ordering the exhausted elves to sit down and eat. The tension breaks momentarily as Arryn praises the meal, and his spirit companion cheerfully pops up to claim credit for helping. In a grassy field, Arryn questions the elf, asking if he really expects him to fight the approaching heroes in this open space. Arryn points out that this is already his territory, and asks if the elf intends for him to act as a spy against the heroes. With a confident smirk, Arryn gestures with his hand and dares the elf to attack him. Floating in the air, Arryn sets the rules for their duel, promising to use only one hand and refrain from using demonic energy. Furious at the handicap, the elf charges up his power and threatens to crush Arryn's head if he fails to keep his word. The elf launches a ferocious aerial kick, but Arryn easily blocks the powerful strike with a single arm. The impact shakes the air, yet Arryn withstands the blow with a bored expression, completely unmoved. Refusing to give up, the elf gathers green magical energy in his hand for a follow-up attack. Suddenly, glowing vines burst from the ground, wrapping tightly around the attacker's leg to bind him. The elf roars in frustration and effort, trying to force his punch forward despite the sudden restraint. A dark, sinister smile creeps across Arryn's face as he watches his opponent struggle. The atmosphere turns instantly heavy and ominous as a warning hangs in the air. A terrifying shadowy figure looms over his target with sharp claws raised, exuding a menacing aura. Despite his monstrous appearance and sharp grin, the figure assures his victim that he is not planning to use his dark powers. The terrified warrior, sweating profusely from the pressure, desperately cries out for the attack to stop. A loud impact echoes through the snowy mountains surrounding the isolated tower. This building serves as the headquarters for the Red Hawk mercenaries. Inside, the mercenary leader suddenly changes his tune, greeting the visitor with overwhelming enthusiasm and greed. While his subordinates grumble about his lack of pride, the leader eagerly asks about the budget from the man who just beat them up. The visitor answers the question by dropping a massive heavy sack of gold coins onto the table. The injured crew members look on skeptically, trying to maintain their dignity despite the display of wealth. As the captain eagerly accepts the new orders, one of the battered men calls out to stop the conversation. The warrior steps forward with a swollen face and bandages, looking intense and serious. His companions watch him nervously, wondering if he is about to cause trouble. Instead of fighting, tears of emotion begin to stream down his bruised cheeks. The mercenaries suddenly come together in a warm, emotional group hug. The visitor stands silently, watching the unexpected display of brotherhood among the men he just hired. The Demon King's eyes narrow with intense focus as he contemplates the situation. He envisions the group of hardened warriors who serve under his command. With a fierce shout, he asserts his will and prepares to take action. A mysterious tower stands tall and isolated amidst the snowy mountains. Seated on his throne, the king receives reports from his subordinates about a valuable discovery of spirit blossoms. He decides to personally retrieve the blossoms to increase his power, despite the potential dangers. His aide warns that the monsters guarding the glowing flowers will attack anyone, even the Demon King himself. The magical energy within the rare blossoms is described as being exceptionally refined. With an abrupt movement, he accepts the situation with cold pragmatism, deciding that any resource is preferable to total scarcity. This sudden resignation leaves his companion astonished, completely caught off guard by the abrupt change in attitude. Gordon Dirk, Berger's assistant, is caught off guard by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The shock shows on his face as he processes the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. Ignoring the tension in the air, he turns his attention to the immediate logistical problem with a calculating demeanor. The search for the spiritual flowers proves to be a daunting obstacle, demanding absolute seriousness in the face of the anticipated difficulty. The planning is abruptly interrupted by the sharp sound of a knock echoing through the hall. Confusion overtakes them both, as a visit to that door was not in anyone's plans. The door opens timidly, revealing a small intruder who peers into the room with evident curiosity. With a gelatinous companion perched atop her head, she surveys the scene with a look of pure innocence. Understanding strikes the man in front with a sudden snap, dispelling the initial confusion. Meanwhile, his companion remains frozen, his mind blank in the face of that completely unexpected visit. Under the falling snow, the pair leaves the imposing structure behind, divided between his silent solemnity and her pure euphoria. The young girl's contagious joy vibrates in the icy air, echoing even among the small creatures that celebrate the departure. Arryn smiles playfully at her companion, reminding him that he must keep his promise to her. Draxen stands beside her in the cold wind, listening silently with a stoic expression. She closes her eyes for a moment, looking content and peaceful. Suddenly, Arryn opens her eyes wide, startled by a sudden movement. Draxen abruptly sweeps her up into his arms and spreads his massive black wings, telling her to hold on tight. They launch into the sky with explosive speed, tearing through the clouds. The intense wind forces Arryn to shut her eyes tight as they ascend. As the flight stabilizes, she opens her eyes, her gaze filled with wonder. Looking down from high above, Arryn is awestruck by the vastness of the world beneath them. The sight triggers memories of her past, where she spent her time casting magic in the palace and studying diligently in the library. She chatters excitedly, boasting that she is likely the only person to fly over these mountains, but Draxen dismisses her words with indifference. Undeterred, Arryn looks at him with a warm smile and speaks about their future together. After landing, Draxen scolds her for overstepping her boundaries and threatens her with prison, causing her to quickly apologize. A small blue spirit flies away from them into the sky, calling out for them to return safely. Draxen watches the spirit leave, his expression turning serious as he notes the speed of events. The winged figure descends from the sky, gently cradling the girl in his arms as spirits flutter around them. On the barren ground below, a mystical flower blooms and radiates a brilliant light. A horde of massive beasts marches toward the glowing blossom, their heavy footsteps shaking the earth. Standing between the monsters and the flower, the man commands them to halt and obey the Demon King's authority. The creatures refuse to yield, growling their defiance and rejecting his orders. A chilling smile spreads across the man's face as he realizes diplomacy is no longer an option. Dark magic begins to swirl and gather in his hands, preparing for a strike. He coldly declares that if they will not listen, he will simply burn them all to ash. The beasts roar in retaliation, furious and determined to defend what they believe is theirs. With a snap of his fingers, the man unleashes a burst of volatile energy. A torrent of dark power rains down from above, crushing the horde under its overwhelming weight. The monsters scream in agony as they are consumed and disintegrated by the magic. The girl watches the destruction unfold, startled by the sheer intensity of the conflict. Unfazed, the man readies another sphere of destructive power to finish the fight. A massive explosion of energy erupts around them, shielding the pair while obliterating the remaining enemies. A terrifying surge of dark energy erupts, filling the air with an ominous pressure. The young girl watches in shock as the overwhelming force manifests before her. The man crosses his arms, unleashing a torrent of dark magic to shield against the impact. The terrifying power of the Demon King rages, tearing through the surroundings with ferocious intensity. As the dust settles, the two figures stand alone amidst the ruins of a frozen, desolate wasteland. Despite the harsh cold, the girl concentrates her mana, pouring her energy into the frozen ground. From the snow, a magical hyacinth blooms, radiating a pure water and ice attribute. The man observes the creation with surprise, while the girl beams with determination to prove her worth. Ernan pushed herself to her absolute limits, exhausting her strength in the process. Their journey led them to Berja's tower, standing isolated amidst the freezing mountains. He contemplates the identity of the creator, recognizing her as Ernan Hilderen, the crown princess. Watching her rest among the spirits, he realizes she possesses far more utility than he first anticipated. Back in the throne room, the dark-haired man questions the report he's receiving. It is reported that she, alongside 32 other chosen heroes, has already left the capital city. The group makes their way across the land, advancing by fulfilling requests for the local villagers. The master of the tower sits on his throne, reviewing the existing plans for the upcoming hero's journey. Unimpressed with the standard procedures, he decides to discard the current files entirely. A wicked smile crosses his face as he comes up with a much more entertaining and ruthless strategy. He turns to his subordinate and instructs him to prepare for a direct intervention in the hero's path. The subordinate hesitates, pointing out that their current tower defenses are likely too weak to stop the heroes. The master confidently reveals the key to his new plan, mentioning the need for a specific dwarven craftsman. The subordinate immediately loses his temper, shouting in outrage at the mere suggestion of working with such a creature. The master instantly silences the outburst by releasing a terrifying aura of dark power. With his subordinate cowed into silence, the master calmly explains the precise nature of the upgrade he requires. He envisions a brutal welcome for the invaders, picturing dozens of heavy cannons obliterating them on the very first floor. The subordinate stares in shock, stunned by the overwhelming and unfair nature of the proposed trap. He shakes his head in disbelief, struggling to accept a plan that goes against all standard dungeon conventions. Left with no room to argue, the subordinate stands trembling before the throne, forced to accept the absurd command. Overwhelmed by the stress of the situation, he screams out in frustration as he prepares to carry out the order. The story shifts to the destination of their quest, Wulfna, the underground city of the dwarves. Amidst flying sparks, a master craftsman works with intense focus. He is known as Loger Friedrich, the greatest blacksmith of the dwarven race. A cloaked traveler arrives at the guarded entrance of the city of dwarves. As he gazes at the city built into the stone, he recalls his past battles against dwarves. Seeking guidance, he enters an establishment known as the Midnight Inn. He places gold coins on the counter and asks the innkeeper for directions. The dwarf greedily accepts the payment and tells him to head to the lowest floor. He arrives at a massive lift station where security strictly checks IDs to catch intruders. Ignoring the official lift, he steps onto the railing surrounding the shaft. He dives straight down into the deep dark hole. Landing safely in an industrial corridor, he hears the rhythmic sound of metal being struck. He pauses at a doorway, listening intently to the loud clanging from within. Inside, a massive forge roars with fire and energy. Loger Friedrich is hard at work, hammering a piece of metal with incredible force. The traveler silently observes the blacksmith's skilled movements. The cloaked intruder prepares to quietly abduct his target, hoping to avoid causing a scene. Suddenly, a massive hammer strikes down, shattering the silence with a burst of sparks. The intruder is startled, sensing an unexpected and potent surge of demonic energy from the blow. He realizes his attacker is a powerful dwarf, whose strength far exceeds that of a simple blacksmith. The dwarf brings his weapon down in a fiery explosion, attempting to crush the invader. Effortlessly, the intruder catches the giant hammer with one hand, halting the attack instantly. The dwarf stares in shock, unable to comprehend how his powerful strike was stopped so easily. A sinister smile forms on the intruder's face as he asserts his dominance. Revealing himself as a demon king, he unleashes a terrifying red aura that overwhelms the dwarf. Defeated, the dwarf drops his weapon, letting it clang against the stone floor. The commotion alerts the armored guards stationed nearby, who realize an intrusion has occurred. Alarms ring out across the industrial district as the facility goes into high alert. Commands to block the exits and search the area echo through the underground city, while the intruder hides with his captive. Holding the dwarf hostage, the Demon King is asked if he has come to kidnap their princess. The question leaves him visibly confused, as he has no idea what princess the dwarf is talking about. The captured dwarf remains stubbornly silent, refusing to utter a word despite being pinned down. In his mind, however, he screams that his quiet lifestyle was solely due to his crippling fear of fighting demon kings. The interrogator mistakes this silence for resilience and decides to try a more psychological approach. He threatens to spread a rumor so damaging that it would turn the entire demon world against the dwarf. The dwarf is horrified, realizing that such a lie would result in him being tortured for the rest of his life. As the interrogator spins a tale about a hero selling out a princess, the dwarf frantically points to a figure standing in the background. He shouts in the predator takes pleasure in cornering his prey, invading their space with a cruel and undeniable satisfaction. Fear freezes the victim, whose cold sweat reveals that the threat is now inescapable. The crushing pressure leaves no room for doubt or retreat, turning the environment into a suffocating trap. With tension written across his face and cold sweat betraying the mortal danger, he finds himself forced to confront the brute force that subdues him. His body tightens in a spasm of pure resistance, struggling not to yield under the crushing weight of the situation. Every drop of sweat and the painful clenching of his eyes reveal that he is at the absolute limit of his strength. The display of resistance does not provoke contempt, but a radiant and unexpected fascination. Faced with such tenacity, the observer is overcome by genuine admiration, almost moved by the effort he witnesses. A metallic boom echoes from the monumental tower, asserting its authority over the iron courtyard. Below, the guard remains motionless and disciplined, forming an impenetrable wall of steel before the entrance. Far from being intimidated, she is overcome by absolute and uncontrollable fascination. What should inspire only respect ignites a flame of pure admiration in her eyes, as if she had just discovered a treasure. Louise Beret, the princess of the Dwarven Kingdom, asserts her presence in the chamber, impatiently demanding to know the whereabouts of the craftsman who dared to disappear in the midst of forging her weapon. Princess Louise's fury erupts, silencing any insolence with a deafening roar. She fiercely defends the honor of the one she seeks, refusing to allow them to diminish the hero status he deserves. A warrior descends rapidly from above, preparing to ambush the armored guards stationed on the ground. She issues a violent threat, warning that she will tear off their heads if they fail to find her target. Deep underground, a cloaked figure follows a dwarf guide through a dimly lit secret passage. The tunnel becomes incredibly tight, forcing the dwarf to struggle and wiggle through the narrow gap. Impatient with the delay, the man uses magic to forcefully shove the complaining dwarf forward. They emerge from the cramped tunnel to overlook a massive, illuminated fortress built within the cavern. The dwarf collapses on the rocky ground, completely exhausted from the strain of the journey. The dwarf's exhaustion is instantly replaced by terror at the presence of a being that radiates pure power and scorn. The dark entity dismisses every word spoken as a laughable nonsense, ready to punish such insolence with crushing force. Shrouded in an aura of pure malice, he displays a predatory smile as he reduces the matter to mere trash. With utter disdain, the entity makes it clear that such insignificance does not deserve even a drop of his consideration. Bloodlust overflows, igniting a manic gleam in his eyes as he revels in the prospect of violence. There is no hesitation, only the raw euphoria of a predator about to devour his prey. The claw wrapped in sinister energy extends, casting a shadow of imminent death over its prey. The blacksmith, overcome by pure terror, realizes his total helplessness and trembles as he recoils before that overwhelming presence. Terror buckles the artisan's knees, turning him into a servant who begs for mercy before the imposing figure. In a final act of desperation, he offers the only thing he has of value, the promise to forge any instrument of destruction his new master desires. A manic and nervous laugh breaks the silence, masking the panic that trickles down his skin. Driven by pure survival instinct, he throws himself into frantic action, trying to disguise his absolute terror with forced enthusiasm. The cold offer of mercy in exchange for loyalty is accepted without the slightest hesitation. Driven by pure terror, the warrior abandons any dignity and prostrates himself frantically, clinging to the only chance of surviving the overwhelming presence before him. The mask of submission falls away instantly, giving way to a fierce scorn for the very idea of obedience. With brute force and a defiant smile, he prepares to crush the arrogance of anyone who dared to think they could control him. The captured dwarf screams a defiant warning, claiming that his captors will regret releasing him for the rest of their lives. However, the dark-haired man and his subordinates simply stand in the grassy field, unimpressed by the small prisoner's outburst. The dwarf freezes in confusion, realizing that the reaction he expected is not happening at all. The leader interrupts his subordinate's report, surprised to see that they have actually brought a dwarf into their fold. As the white-haired girl questions the situation, the dwarf begins to sweat nervously, sensing danger. The dwarf stammers that he was promised his freedom, but the leader coldly replies that he never made such a promise. Suddenly, the dwarf is struck by a swift and forceful blow. His face contorts in shock as the reality of his situation crashes down on him. Terror fills his eyes as menacing laughter rings out, drowning out his earlier confidence. He stands trembling in the open field, completely surrounded and at the mercy of the group. The leader looks down at him with a sinister grin, pleased with the opportunity that has presented itself. Looming over the weeping, terrified dwarf, the man announces that he has a specific mission for him to fulfill. He commands the craftsman to manufacture and install a massive number of heavy cannons. With a clenched hand, he declares that these weapons will be used to completely destroy the heroes. Back at the mansion under the cover of night, the reality sets in that this Demon King is terrifyingly knowledgeable about human methods. The elf stands quietly holding a glowing blue interface in his hand. He mentions the rumors spreading through the land, claiming the new Demon King is too afraid to send out his beasts. The Demon King smiles confidently, declaring that the heroes will gain nothing from this journey, but he imposes a strict rule. No mana stones are to be used. Accepting the condition, the elf looks down at the small orb in his palm and agrees. He stands silent for a moment, processing the command. With his orders received, the elf turns and walks toward the bright entrance of the hall. The Demon King raises a finger to correct a misunderstanding about their strategy. The dwarf panics, insisting that their usual tricks won't work against the heroes. He explains that heroes are blessed by the dimension with keen senses, making it impossible to hide traps from them. The dwarf is left gaping in shock, unsure of how they can proceed. Suddenly, the Demon King conjures a swirling ball of dark purple energy in his hand. The dwarf screams in disbelief, having never witnessed such power before. The Demon King's face is shadowed and his eyes glow menacingly as he displays his overwhelming aura. Terrified by the intensity of the energy, the dwarf collapses and bursts into tears. He freezes in place, completely paralyzed by the terrifying presence before him. A menacing man corners the terrified craftsman, boasting about how easily he can trigger a disaster with a single gesture. He taunts his captive with a holographic projection, revealing that an escape plan is already in motion. The fugitive's path is traced across a map, showing a long journey that spans across several different kingdoms. A cloaked figure moves through the streets, slicing through obstacles with deadly precision to catch his prey. The pursuit leads to a dark fortified cavern where the hunter finally corners the fleeing dwarf. Sudden destruction shatters the peace as a massive force smashes through the wooden defenses, startling the guards. Elsewhere, a furious princess screams at her subordinates, enraged that the missing person has not been found after weeks of searching. The soldiers try to explain that the search is slow because they must investigate every single tunnel in the area. Their excuses only fuel the royal's anger, causing her to lash out and reject their explanations. She violently grabs the commander, threatening him with death if results are not produced immediately. To demonstrate her fury, she smashes the ground with overwhelming strength while her troops tremble in fear. The princess stands amidst the rubble she created, her patience completely exhausted. She looks down at a black blade on the floor, recognizing it as the unfinished work of the kidnapped smith, Loga. Crushing the metal with her bare hands, she demands that Loga stay alive just long enough to complete her weapon. Her tantrum is suddenly interrupted when she notices a figure signaling to her from the walkway above. The princess pauses, her attention caught by something unexpected in her vicinity. A dwarf attempts to stay hidden behind a piece of machinery, relying on a face-masking device to conceal his identity. The princess's eyes widen in shock as she suddenly recognizes the figure hiding from her. She looms over the small craftsman cowering inside a metal container, her massive presence filling the room. Sweating profusely, the dwarf looks up in terror and stammers, realizing he stands before royalty. The princess cracks her knuckles ominously, signaling that she is ready to use physical force. With a terrifying smile, she accuses him of hiding simply to avoid crafting a weapon for her. She calls him by name Logar, demanding to know if his refusal was the sole reason for his disappearance. Insulted by his audacity, she steps forward and declares that he is now her property. Before taking him into custody, she charges her fist with energy to punish him for running away. A powerful shockwave blasts through the area as she unleashes her attack. The princess stands amidst the smoke and debris, her muscular form tense and ready for more violence. Suddenly, a black boot steps firmly onto the floor, interrupting the chaotic scene. A dark-haired man intervenes with dark magic, shielding the dwarf as the craftsman scrambles to escape. Massive gears and machinery whirl into motion, reacting to the sudden burst of magical power. A massive beam of energy descends from above, engulfing the area in a blinding explosion. The woman screams in fury, accusing her enemy of returning solely to steal from her. Her opponent's gaze sharpens, his focus narrowing entirely on the battle at hand. With a lightning-fast movement, he delivers a powerful kick that intercepts her attack. The force of the blow sends her crashing violently into the surrounding debris. Seizing the opening, the intruder activates his subspace pocket to capture the target. Unfazed by the impact, the woman roars that his attacks are useless and charges back in. However, she is too late. The massive machine begins to dematerialize and vanish into the dimensional storage. Realizing she is losing the prize, she turns her rage toward her slow-moving guards. She leaps into the air with explosive power, desperate to stop the theft. Suddenly, her expression shifts from anger to shock as the object completely disappears. A twisted, unsettling grin begins to spread across her face. Her eyes widen with pure madness as she processes the situation. Far away in a grand hall, the stolen machine materializes out of thin air, settling heavily on the floor. The Demon King stands before the massive artifact while his confused subordinates marvel at its sudden arrival, and the system prompts him to synchronize. The mechanic reports that the installation is finally complete. Without wasting a moment, the Demon King orders the immediate activation of the device. Dark energy surges around the Demon King as he prepares the machine, while the mechanic watches with manic excitement. The mechanism responds instantly, generating a swirling vortex of blue mana within its core. A blinding light erupts from the center, forcing the observers to shield their eyes from the intense brilliance. Unaffected by the glare, the Demon King calmly monitors the data streams appearing on a holographic interface. He focuses his will, syncing his own energy with the system to stabilize the flow. The massive spherical device hums with power, fully operational and glowing with ethereal light before the group. The mechanic is overwhelmed with joy, shouting in disbelief that merging with the tower was actually possible. Turning to the princess, the Demon King instructs her to cast any spell she desires to test the new capabilities. She accepts the challenge enthusiastically, unleashing a chaotic storm of elemental magic into the air. The Demon King watches from the safety of the structure as the massive spell manifests in the sky above them. Leaving the others behind, footsteps crunch softly against the snow-covered ground outside. The Demon King stands alone between the towering walls, sensing that the work is not quite finished yet. His expression suddenly shifts as he detects something unexpected in the environment. He reaches down, sending a pulse of dark energy surging directly into the frozen earth. The dark-haired man raises his hand, channeling a dark energy that swirls around him. High in the snowy mountains, the magic manifests across the frozen landscape. He focuses his power, the purple energy intensifying around his gloved fingers. The spell surrounds a massive, dark tower that looms silently amidst the falling snow. The man pauses, looking confused as he processes an unexpected request about a wish. A sly smile crosses his face as he realizes how he can turn this situation to his advantage. The goggled dwarf screams frantically, begging the Demon King to let him take apart and study the tower. Desperate to touch the historic machinery, the engineer falls to his knees and pleads for permission to examine the discovery. He promises to sweep away the crafty heroes if he is just allowed to satisfy his scientific curiosity. With his request granted, the dwarf cheers in triumph and rushes toward the machine. The man turns his attention to the blonde woman, stating that he has a proposal for her as well. She points out her status as a princess with surprise, but he insists that she has the talent he needs. His expression becomes serious as he prepares to give her a crucial instruction. The princess begins to overthink, wondering which elemental magic she should use to fight. However, the man clarifies that she doesn't need to fight for real, but simply pretend to be an enemy. The girl interrupts the conversation to state that she has a condition before proceeding. The man immediately accepts her terms, noting that her request is simple to fulfill. She strikes a pose and declares her confidence, though the man remains stoic. Later, seated on his throne, the man reviews strategic data on holographic screens. He analyzes the intelligence regarding the number of armed heroes on the first floor. Looking at the images of the armored enemy forces, he determines that the current situation is far from sufficient. He gazes at a dark power manifesting in his hand, realizing he must become stronger himself. The group departs from the tower, venturing out into the snowy landscape with the princess cheering. As they walk, the man senses something strange and expresses annoyance at the spirits. A massive looming figure suddenly steps into their path, casting a large shadow. The creature reveals itself to be a large beast with white fur and blue skin. Recognizing the threat as a pearl orc, the man summons dark energy to attack. However, instead of striking, the beast drops heavily to its knees in the snow. The orc bows respectfully, greeting him as the Demon King and pleading for its tribe to join him. The entire pack of monsters kneels in unison, begging to be accepted as his kin. The young lord stares intently at the creatures before him, listening to their plea. A tribe of blue-skinned warriors kneels in the snow, their leader bowing his head to confess the burden of their history. Realizing that these intimidating figures only wish to talk, the protagonist gathers dark energy in his hand while addressing them. The chieftain watches carefully as one of his subordinates steps forward, presenting a small mysterious chest. The lid is lifted to reveal 3 radiant flowers, each glowing with a distinct and powerful magical light. The protagonist and his companion look at the treasure, finally understanding why these rare items had been impossible to find until now. The chieftain explains that despite living in such a harsh frozen land, his people have always valued wisdom over brute strength. The warrior looks up with a steady gaze, waiting for the verdict of the man standing before him. Pleased by their philosophy, the young lord smiles and activates a magical circle, declaring his approval of the tribe. The chieftain is suddenly engulfed in a powerful surge of red energy, his eyes widening in shock. A glowing dragon crest burns itself onto the warrior's skin as he receives a command to expand his tribe across the snowfields. As the transformation takes hold, the Lord promises a reward far greater than physical power in exchange for their patience and obedience. The chieftain, Krutu, rises in his new imposing form, having evolved into a powerful vassal of the Demon King. The young lord and the girl stand calmly in the cold wind, looking upon the warrior they have just claimed. The entire tribe bows in unison, swearing absolute loyalty to their new master amidst the frozen mountains. A massive dark tower stands isolated amidst the freezing snow. Legions of armed blue giants march through the blizzard, ready for war. Deep inside the fortress, a dwarf stands guard over a stockpile of 60 powerful mana cannons. Elsewhere, the summoner Ernan Hilderan commands her elemental spirits in preparation for battle. A dark-haired man sits upon a throne, monitoring all these forces through floating magical screens. He observes the unfolding situation with a sharp, intense gaze. Far away from the fortress, snow falls quietly over a dense forest. The hero and his elven companion emerge from the woods, announcing their arrival in Granada. The entire party stands together, looking out toward the towering Ergus Mountains on the horizon. They take refuge in a grand fortified city to prepare for the final leg of their quest. Inside the palace, a lavish banquet brings together heroes and nobles for a moment of respite. An elder speaks to the hero, acknowledging that their long journey has finally reached its critical stage. He reminds the group that tomorrow is the day they will finally strike back against the Demon King. The elder shouts loudly to capture the attention of every soul in the banquet hall. The gathered heroes and soldiers look on with confidence, united by the call to action. A knight in golden-trimmed armor pauses for a moment, gathering his thoughts before speaking. Standing at the head table, he addresses the banquet hall, acknowledging the presence of his companions and guests. The guests listen to his words, some with amusement while others watch intently. Raising his gauntleted hand, the knight lifts a glass of wine to propose a toast. He shouts with great passion, rallying the spirits of everyone in the room. The crowd responds instantly, throwing their fists in the air and cheering loudly for justice. With the toast finished, the knight encourages everyone to begin the feast and enjoy the food and drink. While the knight laughs and enjoys the party, his elven companion sits beside him with a stoic expression. The elf remains silent, his eyes narrowing as he drifts into his own suspicious thoughts. Suddenly, he is startled out of his contemplation. looking panicked. Frustrated, the elf covers his face with his hand, stressing over the knight's behavior. Later, the elf steps out onto a balcony and uses a magical device to report their arrival in Holton and their travel plans. On the other end of the communication, a dark-haired man listens to the report with a faint smile. The elf stares at the magical flame in his hand, confused by a question from the other side. He jumps in fright as the knight suddenly appears behind him, catching him off guard. A knight offers a glass of fruit wine to his elven companion, knowing it is a favorite among his kind. The elf accepts the drink but voices his anxiety about whether they can truly defeat the Demon King. Staring into his wine, the knight admits that he shares the same uncertainty as his friend. He confesses that despite the trust people place in him, challenging a Demon King's tower is always a hellish experience. The elf listens silently as the knight reflects on the heavy burden of leadership and expectation. He points out that the details of how the knight defeated the Demon King of Lust remain a mystery to everyone. The knight pauses, letting the question hang in the air without an immediate answer. Suddenly, he breaks the tension with a bright, confident laugh to reassure his companion. He leans in with a playful demeanor, brushing aside the serious topic. The elf relaxes, smiling back at his friend's apparent confidence. Guiding the elf inside, the knight mentions that the fortress master is waiting to hear their stories. However, as soon as the elf turns away, the knight's smile vanishes, replaced by a dark expression. He brings a ring to his lips, his gaze sharp and filled with a hidden intensity. Outside, the fortress city stands vast and fortified, housing the people they are sworn to protect. The voices of the citizens rise up from the streets, cheering for strength and the glory of Granada. The expedition team marches forward, their expressions hardening as they approach their destination. They arrive at the gorge of the Urgest Mountains, a towering landscape of ice and snow. As they trek through the snow, the soldiers chat casually, noting that the weather is surprisingly clear and mild. The mood remains light-hearted, with some joking that the monsters must be hibernating since it is so quiet. Suddenly, the laughter dies down when a strange, purple substance drops from above and splatters onto a soldier's head. He pauses in confusion, feeling the viscous slime drip down his face as he tries to understand what just happened. Realization strikes as someone shouts a warning, pointing out the hordes of ghouls crawling down the steep cliffs to ambush them. The hidden enemies have finally revealed themselves, surrounding the group from the high ground. The commander reacts instantly, drawing his weapon and shouting for all units to get into battle formation. Chaos erupts in the narrow gorge as knights rush to cover the mages, trying to hold the line against the descending undead. Suddenly, a massive shadow falls over the troops, causing them to freeze in terror as a new threat emerges. The commander identifies the threat as a frost giant and orders his men to escape the gorge while he holds it off alone. The giant skeletal creature looms over them, its empty eye sockets glowing with a menacing red light. It stands tall, a terrifying monstrosity of bone and ice that blocks the path with its immense size. Undeterred by the size difference, the commander leaps into the air with his sword drawn to strike the giant head-on. A warrior screams a desperate command to his allies as the chaos of battle surrounds them. A massive explosion tears through the snowy canyon, scattering the soldiers who scramble to find cover. The survivors are left exhausted and gasping for breath, struggling to recover in the freezing snow. One of the knights remarks that the intensity of this battle surpasses even the horrors of the Demon King's tower. The group realizes their enemy has absorbed the power of the Demon King of Lust, making him a terrifyingly powerful opponent. The elf looks on with visible strain and anxiety, overwhelmed by the relentless pressure of the fight. The blonde knight grits his teeth, acknowledging the overwhelming strength of the Demon King they are facing. Suddenly, a new threat appears on the ridge above as a group of massive figures looks down upon the weary party. The heroes look up in alarm, realizing they are now surrounded by a squad of orcs. Among the monsters stands a terrifying blue demon with a broken horn and eyes glowing with dark energy. The dark-haired swordsman steps forward and confidently declares that he will handle the enemies quickly, interrupting his companion. He wears a calm, almost pleasant smile, appearing completely unfazed by the monstrous threat. The elf stares in shock and disbelief at his companion's reckless confidence in the face of such danger. The blue demon glares menacingly, its eyes locking onto the human who dares to challenge it. A sinister, confident grin spreads across the swordsman's face as he prepares to unleash his power. The group stands frozen, gazing up at the snowy mountain as an ominous rumbling echoes from the peaks. Staring in absolute disbelief, the elf questions how anyone could possibly be expected to guard against a disaster of this magnitude. Overcome by the sheer terror of the situation, he screams out in panic as the threat descends upon them. Far away from the cold, a man sits comfortably on his throne, monitoring the destruction through floating magical screens. A satisfied smirk plays on his lips as he watches the events unfold exactly as he anticipated. His expression darkens with intensity as he declares his specific intentions for this particular cycle. He grins maliciously, taking pleasure in the sight of the artisan screaming in agony on the screen before him.